Welcome committee members, liaisons, and members of the public to the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission meeting. Thank you for joining us. We are using Zoom with a goal to foster a more inclusive environment and an effective meeting. If you would like to comment during the meeting, please use the raise hand feature. Utilize this tool to virtually indicate that you would like to speak in order to help the chair facilitate the discussion. A friendly reminder, this is a video conference meeting, and to be aware of the surroundings behind you. All Legal Services Trust Fund Commission and committee meetings will be recorded and posted to the State Bar's website. Zoom captioning is available. To enable, select live transcript at the bottom of your Zoom screen, then select enable transcript. Thank you.
Great. Why don't we do roll call?
Sure. Connolly,
Present.
Alsteroff, Escobedo, Milrod, Alicani,
Present.
Babcock,
Present.
Blakemore,
Present.
Campbell,
Present.
Vanetta, or sorry, Galkin, Gonzalez, Wong,
Here.
King,
Here.
Klein, Mahoney,
Here.
Morales,
Here.
Pryor,
Here.
Judge Rosie,
Here.
Sandville,
Here.
Smith,
Here.
Stalker,
Here.
Vargas.
Here.
All right, now just call on our advisors. Justice Rodriguez,
Here.
Judge Juan Gutierrez, Judge Yang, and then do I see our liaisons? Is Selena on the call? Is he Selena Lauren?
Present.
Okay, wonderful. And then is Melanie on the call as well? You don't see.
And Crystal Judging raised his hand, so I don't know if you got him.
Oh,
I just promoted him.
thank you. Okay. And then I'll just take a note of State Bar staff. Duan, Chris. All right. And we have 14 voting members present, and we have quorum.
Great. Why don't we take public comment, and let's limit it to 2 minutes this time, so it's kind of a quick meeting. Do we have any public comment?
No one has their hand raised.
Okay, then why don't we dive into the business? We have 2 items on the agenda today, and hopefully everyone got the memos on them. And so I believe, is it Chris that's going to be presenting?
Yes. Hello. I'm going to share my
Awesome.
screen.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Erica. Just one moment.
Actually, while you're getting set up, I'll just say many thanks to commission members for being present and attending this, because I think this is like a really big opportunity. And so appreciate you making time in the new year, and Happy New Year to everyone. Okay, Chris, over to you.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. And thank you very much from State Bar staff as well. This is obviously the first commission meeting of 2025. It's also a special meeting and responsive to kind of emerging and time-sensitive public policy development. So kudos to the commission for being so nimble. The 2 agenda items for this meeting shared both a memo. We posted the same memo twice, just with the different headers, and they share a PowerPoint deck. So this slide is to address both items 1.1 and 1.2 together. They have a similar public policy genesis. The first item is delegation of authority to approve potential increases to Equal Access Fund, or EAF grants, that would arise from the governor's special session in early December. And the second item is delegation of authority to approve a request for proposals and eventually grant awards for potential post-election competitive grants. We have separate resolutions for these 2 items, so the commission can consider them together or separately, and they'll appear at the end of the slide deck. So for background, Governor Newsom convened a special session on December 2nd. His proclamation convening the legislature was in November. They met both chambers on December 2nd to consider laws, or at least the Senate met on the 2nd to consider laws that would provide additional funding to the California Department of Justice and other agencies. For special or extraordinary sessions, the scope of legislation that the legislature may consider is generally limited to the scope of the proclamation. So that's the scope of that proclamation was an appropriation session that would be responsive to the outcome of the federal election. And during its session, the Senate adopted a special session budget plan because it was an extraordinary session. The abbreviation for it is SBX 1-1. I'm just going to refer to it going forward as the bill. The bill would amend the Budget Act of 2024, which is the most recent budget act to pass in California. It's the budget act that the legislature passed and the governor signed at the end of last June. So we're like halfway through the current state fiscal year. It would amend that law to provide an additional $10 million for the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission to administer to current, and that would be calendar year 2025, EAF grantees. And up to 2.5% of that, which is somewhat standard these days for appropriation statutes, up to for the commission's funds, up to 2.5% of that would be available to cover judicial council and state bar admin costs. As a side note, it's actually a very exciting sort of basket of proposed appropriations that would be of benefit to legal services because it also appropriates $10 million for the California Department of Social Services to administer for removal defense and $5 million for the California Access to Justice Commission to administer for very important projects that would protect the information of legal services staff, clients, and volunteers and other coordination work. So it's this, but today's delegations of authorities, the proposed resolutions are just with respect to the $10 million that would go to the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission to administer for EAF grantees. The bill that the Senate adopted would provide that the legal services for this $10 million increase, so not the underlying EAF grants that they already got for 2025, but just the potential increase would be for legal services to vulnerable persons at risk of detention, deportation, eviction, wage theft, intimate partner violence, and other actions that put their safety at risk. The bill is still pending. It has yet to pass the state assembly. The governor has not signed it. So it is, of course, subject to change. The reason the State Bar staff and in conjunction with the commission's co-chairs have asked the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission to meet early in January and is bringing two proposed delegations of authority is because the legislature has already communicated to State Bar staff that it would be critical to distribute the additional formula funds for EAF grantees if this bill passes and becomes law as soon as possible. The public policy thinking there is that federal programs, federal enforcement priorities, policies and practices, federal laws may start to change as early as late January in a way that would be of high consequence to indigent Californians. And history has sort of shown that that can be true. If you think back to, maybe just 4 years ago. And so because of the urgency and the potential change to federal programs in the next few weeks, the legislature has said it would be very important that if these funds became available to try and administer them within 2 to 3 weeks of the law passing. Eligibility for the additional funds would be limited to current EAF grantees for 2025. So these are QLSPs and support centers that the commission has already found eligible for EAF funding. That was at the commission's August meeting. And additionally, the increased amount for each grantee who opts in and submits a qualifying proposal would be subject to a statutory formula. So the dollar amount they would get would be pursuant to the statute. Grantees would need to opt in. That is because the current version of the bill specifies that they would have to affirm that they are providing qualifying services now, and will use the funds to do the work that I put on the slide again here, but the legal services to vulnerable persons who are at those risk of those enumerated things. With that last clause, other actions that put their safety at risk, serving somewhat as a catch-all, so they can, if they want to propose using the increased funding for something that's not detention, deportation, eviction, et cetera, they can make a reasonable argument that other legal aid issues would help to address actions at the federal level that put their safety at risk. Since the staff will be recommending, in conjunction with the commission's co-chairs, that the commission delegate authority to staff to administer this increase if this bill passes in a 2 to 3 week time period. We thought it would behoove staff to say today that we're interpreting that clause, that scope of permissible legal services broadly. We think that the safety language is intended to implicate a very broad range of civil legal aid for indigent Californians, provided the grantee can screen for one or more of those risks. And because it is a quick turnaround, because they're current grantees, this would not be a process where we would be accepting new applications for EAF funding or defunding anyone. It's just administering an increase to their existing grants. It's staff recommendation that the commission delegate authority to state bar staff to approve the formula-based increases to current 2025 EAF awards if and when SBX 1-1 becomes law. That would enable the approximately 3-week turnaround time for grant to actually receive the funds. For grantees to avail themselves of a 3-week turnaround time, they would have to submit an updated EAF project budget within a couple of business days, and then also amend their 2025 EAF grant agreement within a few business days. And if any grantees opt in to receive more funds and would like more time to update their budgets or execute a new grant agreement amendment, that's fine. It might require us to send their distribution outside that 3-week window, but we are optimistic, and that would be like at their election. We are optimistic, though, that most of them, if not practically all of them, who want to receive the funds within 3 weeks can do so, because we had a webinar with them yesterday, and LAC helped to brief all of the 2025 EAF grantees who attended that webinar. It was very well attended. I think we had like over 165 people watch. So they know this is coming. They know that it will be a quick turnaround. They know they have the option to ask for more time if they need it. But I think that anyone who will want to opt in and get their funding within 3 weeks will be able to do so. Now, if there are questions for this proposed delegation of authority, if questions were to come up about whether or not an updated EAF project budget was proposing services, I'm going to tab back just real quick so you can see it, the final bullet point here. If there was any question at all about whether or not the services fell into this scope that the current version of the bill describes, the risk of detention, deportation, et cetera, staff would proposes to elevate that to one of the commission's committees. And that committee would be the eligibility and support committee. For resolution. And that would likely require distribution after the 3 weeks, but staff would endeavor to provide the EAF grantees with technical assistance to try and minimize the need for any questions about whether or not what they're proposing is within the scope of the statute. So only if following technical assistance, staff still felt like it wasn't necessarily legal service, it may or may not be legal services to vulnerable persons at risk of these things, it would go to a commission committee to resolve. I'm going to just pause there for a sec. I have one more slide that's before the resolution. It's going to be about the potential for competitive awards, but I want to just see if there's any questions about this bill that would increase the 2025 EAF grants by $10 million to do this specific kind of post-federal election work. Yeah, Kenneth. And I'm
Yeah,
sorry, Kenneth, I didn't see if Catherine or Kenneth raised their hand first, but
Go ahead, Catherine.
Okay.
Well, Catherine's muted. It's muted.
Yeah,
There you
go
go.
ahead. No, I was just say go ahead. That's what I was trying to say. Sorry.
Well, so Chris, thanks for that presentation. A question. So if the EAF budgets are based on projects that grantees propose, if a grantee has an existing project that falls within one of the categories that the legislature identified in the bill, that might seem to me a different analysis, both for the grantee and for you on staff, than if a grantee hadn't proposed in their EAF budgets projects that fell within the bill. How are you going to be dealing with those differences? Are you going to require, let's say somebody proposed in their approved EAF budget a bankruptcy project or a tax project or something that wasn't within the four corners, even with the catch-all in the bill. Are you going to require all of the things that you would typically require in an EAF application? Or is it going to be a streamlined process to help you get the money out more quickly?
good question. I see Dwan raised her hand. Maybe Dwan, you have an answer.
Yeah, I just want to make a small correction to what Ken's question is that we moved away from project-based budgeting for EEF. So now the language is a set of activities, so they can propose a set of activities, and sometimes it's not contained within a project, but it could span across projects. So that change, I think, came about maybe 7 or 8 years ago. But in regards to your question, Ken, if they're proposing activities that are different than what is in their currently proposed EF budget, it would still need to adhere to the language of the statute and fall. It would need to adhere to this last bullet point and fall under one of these kind of categories. And there's actually some proposed language right now that's not in print that might broaden that a little bit. So whatever sticks that's in print and passes, if it passes, that's what we would hold the programs to, that new standard. And again, for the majority of grantees that do EF budgeting, there's not a problem with what they're proposing. It's squarely legal. It's squarely to provide services to indigent Californians, and then we layer on this post-election kind of issue areas. So I would venture to guess that the majority of budgets that come through would be very clearly qualified. There's probably going to be a couple, like there are every year, a handful of organizations that propose something that is not obviously qualifying to the staff. And that's at the point where we would provide technical assistance, depending on how far it is, that it's aligning with what we think of the statute. We would give them technical assistance, or we'd elevate it to the and that's what Chris said earlier. If there's an issue that's something that we can't approve or we do not feel comfortable, we're not going to delay everybody else. We'll process everybody else's application, get their checks out, and those for that grouping of organizations, will elevate that to the committee to do a further review.
Got it. Thanks.
And then Catherine.
So I think mine was just a clarifying question, or maybe I misheard. So my understanding is the language has not yet been approved by either house of either the Senate or the Assembly, and that's likely to happen on the 14th in a budget committee, and then a full hearing after that. So it sounded like the impression I got was that the Senate had already approved the language, and the Senate hasn't, although it is their bill that's now been posted.
That's totally right. And Catherine, thank you for saying that. I probably said passed, but I should have said the Senate published it. Yeah, so that's totally right. Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, that's correct.
And we worked closely with Selena to kind of advance some modifications to this. And we don't know if it's going to stick. So the language, again, we don't know if it's going to pass at all. And if it does, if they're going to become some modifications to it.
So before I move on to the next slide, I'll just say we had a webinar yesterday, like I was saying before, we had a webinar yesterday. So the 2025 EAF grantees have now been briefed on the existence of the bill and its potential to increase EAF funding statewide by $10 million to do this specific work, and on the general timeline of what by when they would need to opt in, which that would be after the bill. We would wait until we'd make the opt-in deadline after the bill has actually passed. And then kind of what the cadence will be to submit an updated budget, we would streamline it for them as much as we could and amend their grant agreements to do a 3-week, 2 to 3 week distribution. Dwan, was there anything else relevant to the potential for increased equal access funds before I move on to the potential for competitive awards?
No, I'm just gonna say that we, because it's a very aggressive timeline, we have like pretty much front-ended all the work. Like everything has been built out on Smart Simple. That's why we had that preemptive webinar with grantees to kind of get them to think about budgeting if this was to go through, with the very, very big caveat that we don't know at this point whether it's gonna pass or not. But we've done all the kind of legwork on our end. Grant agreements, languages have been already drafted, so everything is kind of ready to go.
And we've assured the grantees that, our office is checking daily to see if there's any action on the published bill. And if we're checking for any sort of changes to the scope of permissible work or eligibility, or if currently the funding formula that it proposes is just the IOLTA funding formula. But if that becomes different, like, we're going to communicate that to grantees ASAP so they always kind of have the most recent information. Okay, so there at the end of the slide deck, there will be a proposed resolution that's just with respect to these potential increased EAF awards. And then there'll be a second resolution to consider that's with respect to potential competitive awards. So this is separate from SBX 1-1, but the State Bar and LAC have been coordinating to advance a request for substantively targeted, like substantively law targeted or community specific competitive funding to an RFP process relating to this, also relating to the state's post-election response. So this would not be coming out of the governor's special session. This would be a separate thing. As with the potential for increased formula funds, though, we think that potential competitive awards, if the legislature passes a statute creating them and the governor approves that, they would also likely seek to protect vulnerable Californians from changes to federal programs relatively early in 2025. Like, there would still be some time sensitivity to that. And so staff anticipates the potential need to distribute competitive funding if and when the legislature creates that within a couple of months, like 1 to 2 months. Again, to just be responsive to the timing of potential changes to federal law and practices. So also in conjunction with the commission's co-chairs, we recommend that the commission delegate authority to the Program Development and Impact Committee, which is the new committee that would stand up brand new RFPs that the authorizing statutes would create. The Program Development and Impact Committee to approve an RFP and awards for potential post-election competitive funds to allow for something like a 1 to 2 month distribution. And I think it would probably be a little bit more than a month at a minimum, because we would need to figure out from grantees how much time they would need to or would like to design projects and whatnot, but to be able to offer a 1 to 2 month timeline to them. And this would enable the commission to be nimble in distributing new competitive funding that might be time sensitive. So this is the corollary proposed delegation of authority. This would not be to staff, but to a committee that sort of shares a public policy background with the other delegation of authority. So after this slide, I believe it's just discussion. I have the 2 resolutions, but I'll pause again and see if there's questions about this proposed delegation of authority to the Impact Committee. Oh, and the last thing I'll say is that staff has conferred with the chair of the Impact Committee, who's Judge Rosie, who has said that she would be supportive of that committee meeting approximately monthly throughout the spring and summer, if necessary, to be able to approve an RFP, and review applications and awards. I think the commission has a new process for scoring applications, but essentially to meet monthly to oversee that process that ends with making award determinations, to be able to do that in like 1 to 2 months. Judge Rosie, I hope it's okay that I just sort of shared that with everybody, but that was the plan.
I was going to raise my hand and say it anyway. So.
Oh, thank you. All right, great. I see Efrain has his hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Christopher, for the presentation. I had a couple questions. One is on the post-election response competitive grants. You mentioned in the first bullet that you advanced a request for targeted competitive funding. I wonder, is that request available to us? Does it specify out what you all are prioritizing as what the competitive funding might target? And then my second question is more related. Once went to RFP is kind of, would the commission get any updates, or what do you envision on what wisdom would you draw on to sort of develop the rubrics to make sure it's getting to the targeted areas and regions, since a lot of this will be potentially for vulnerable population, things that we sometimes maybe aren't structured for. So I'm just curious, what will you draw in to make sure our rubrics are right in these RFPs, that it gets to the right folks?
For your first question, I wonder if maybe Dwan or Selena would like to say something about the nature of any targeted requests we might
Yeah,
have
that's
made.
the typo. We have not we have not advanced. This is an anticipation of us
Okay.
advancing a proposal. So part of what would be advanced is right now we are what we're doing is gathering more information from programs in terms of what their needs are. So we have held a number of focus groups. Our staff has had one-on-one calls and consultations with our programs, and we have 2 scheduled in-person convenings that are happening in February, one in Northern California and one in Southern California. And this is to really to assess from the community what those needs are. From that kind of assessment, and we're also sending out a survey, we will then take that information, synthesize it, and then advance kind of a slate of proposals to the legislature. And this would be done in conjunction with the impact committee. We are thinking of sharing all of that data and all of the information that will through the impact committee. We formulate some type of request and work with the LAC to kind of shape that request. But there has nothing been formalized that has been presented right now to the legislature. These are just steps that we've been brainstorming in order to get to what that request could look like.
Okay,
Thank
that
you.
probably
And that
makes
is
the second part of my question then premature, since you don't know what you do. So
I mean,
I
we
appreciate
have some thoughts right now, just because we've had a lot of conversations with various entities, but we don't have like a dollar numbers like assigned to what an issue areas, and we don't know whether it's going to be a resurrection of an HP homelessness prevention request, or if it's going to be something a little bit broader. So those are the things that we are analyzing right now.
And thank you, John, for pointing out that was a typo. It's yeah, I now that you said it, I realized the materials for today's meeting specified that LAC and the State Bar have coordinated to advance in a request, and I think I bridged that on the slide on accident. Selena.
I just wanted to add the context of the 2 very different purposes of the different pots of funding. One is get it out quickly to every organization that's doing qualifying work, and really time is of the essence. And a lot of it is about like potential and worry, and like what clients are coming to legal aid organizations now already worried about their rights. If something happens that hasn't happened yet. And this is really the competitive grants that we're hoping to advance is really once we know if there are executive orders that may impact particular client communities, we'll have much more information, and we'll be able to have data to know what organizations are doing the qualifying work. And it may be particular regions in California that are more impacted than others. And so, there's a need to work quickly, but not until we know more. And of course, not until the legislature, allocates funds, but there are 2 very different purposes. And I think that most organizations are going to opt into that kind of special session potential fund that helps them kind of gear up and support clients who are worried. But then this one would be much more competitive. And I anticipate probably you would want to probably grant far fewer organizations because you want to make the grant amounts meaningful.
And Dwan was just alluding to this, but the State Bar and LAC are working closely together on different intake mechanisms to help the grantees think about what their funding, their community's legal aid needs will look like in 2025 and beyond, given changes kind of at the federal level, and how that translates to their organization's funding needs. And I think those tools are inclusive at this time. We're thinking about a careful survey, potential convenings, and these would all be kind of early 2025 interventions to the extent that we see that, go those directions to gather as much data as possible to advance a request. Any other questions about the potential for post-election competitive grants? And again, the proposed delegation of authority to the ANCAP committee is just to allow the commission to be able to make those within 1 to 2 months. Well, my next slide is the proposed resolutions. I didn't want to like rush it, but I can go to that slide if that feels like the right time. I did combine them just because the memo combined them. The commission could consider them separately, but together it would read should the commission concur, it is resolved that the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission delegates authority to State Bar staff to approve increases to the 2025 Equal Access Fund grants, including to review and approve updated project budgets as described in staff's memo dated January 7th, 2025. And it is further resolved that the commission delegates authority to the Program Development and Impact Committee to approve a request for proposals, including scoring rubric and reporting requirements. Just as an aside, I'll say that those usually live in the RFP, and awards for post-election competitive grants, as described in staff's memo dated January 7th, 2025. Catherine. Oh, I'm sorry, Catherine, you're on mute.
I think I would know to unmute by now. But I guess I'm just trying to understand for the competitive grants, what is the expected timing? And like, how do we know the timing would be such that it wouldn't be appropriate for the full commission to review what the competitive grants were based on a recommendation of the program committee?
Chris, I can help with that. And then Celine, you can chime in if this is wrong. But I think for the competitive grants, I think that would go during regular sessions. So the advocacy piece of that will happen fairly soon. And that goes through the summer into kind of the fall. The unknown for us, though, is we don't know if there's going to be something else that crops up beforehand. And we don't know if it's going to align with the commission's 4 meetings. So having it delegated to the committee will just give it that nimbleness, because that impact committee is they have already calendared meetings once a month, so they can slide straight into there and there won't be any delays. So we can be as quick as possible on the competitive grants.
So I hear that to be, we anticipate that it's probably part of the regular budget process, not an urgency measure. So it would be approved with a regular budget at the end of June, right?
I mean, that's what we think, but like we said, we can't anticipate if something else will crop up, like the special session. And so if there's something else that happens after this regular special session, then that would allow us to respond to that. The more likely scenario is like, yes, it will be part of the regular session and it will just go on that timeline. But even if that timeline, usually with that regular timeline, and if you wanted to like slide it into the regular commission meeting, that would take about a little bit more than 4 months, depending on when things get approved. Just with the committee, because they meet monthly, we just have a little bit more flexibility. But it's not to say,
I appreciate the flexibility. I'm just trying to balance keeping the full commission informed when it's not an emergency, right? So I appreciate the emergency. I support the delegation as it was outlined. I'm just trying to sort of balance what a committee, just trying to understand, I guess, what do committees do versus what does the full commission do? And if it's going through sort of a non-urgent process and it were approved in June, and the committee would look at it, don't we have a meeting in August or something? Or I guess I'm just trying to factually understand like what the full commission's role would be, so the full commission has an appreciation for the work that's being done.
I think so. Dawn, is that the full commission? Is it February, May, and August? Are those the? I think was that and I would do this in consultation with our office directors and Judge Rossi, who chairs the impact committee, if this delegation goes through, we could work to keep the full commission informed at those 3 meetings as to where things are at, such that the full commission could ask questions, raise concerns if it had concerns, provide input if it wanted to provide input at those 3 meetings. But the delegation authority would still be to the committee. I think that would still be staff's recommendation. But to keep the full commission informed, like not skip over that.
There's not going to be
Yep.
anything to, I mean, the only time you would really know what was happening is in August, right?
Maybe in August, yeah, unless there's something, yeah,
And
unless
so
it's like
then,
out of order.
so the timing, really, I'm just trying to make sure I understand this. So the timing is you're going to do all this work. You're going to, in advance, have a RFP approved and sort of ready to go, I think, is what I heard, right? That the committee's going to be meeting monthly. They're going to have actions they're going to want to be taking. So they're going to draft an RFP. So if they draft something, would it make sense for the commission to approve that at its May meeting, for example?
Well, we don't know. And like they said, it's just we don't know. Even if it was regular session and we didn't know until August, it does slow it down a little bit because the commission then doesn't meet until November again to have to approve. We'd have to call another, we're trying to avoid calling another commission meeting. And if it went through regular session, we won't know for final until around that July, August time.
Well, you'll know in end of June, I think. Because that's when the budget's approved, right? So if it's approved, the governor's going to sign it.
If it's in the Budget Act of 2025, that would pass by the end of June.
Yeah, I mean that's our recommendation, but obviously it's your all's decision.
I really am just trying to find ways that the commission as a whole understands sort of the significant work and has a chance to weigh in about it. So maybe that's what I need to hear more about, how that would happen, rather than committees essentially acting completely as a delegated entity that can make decisions on behalf of the commission, but the majority of the commission wouldn't actually understand what exactly was happening, and to balance that with a desire to be efficient. So I think building in some mechanisms that we better understand what's happening and can ask questions about it, because in the end, it's the full commission's responsibility, right? To make sure we know what's happening. So that, I guess that's my ask.
Would it be, I don't know, this isn't quite the same, but would it be, because Catherine, I think you're saying like for the full commission to meet like at a normal meeting and be able to weigh in, if or something sort of like that, but would it be help if the State Bar staff kept the full commission informed about what would be happening at each of the committee's meetings, so the commissioners could come to the committee meeting and listen in? And I think there's usually a vehicle to be able to make comments at the committee meeting. Like maybe you wouldn't be a voting committee member at that meeting, but you could say like, obviously I'm one of your co-commissioners. This is what I think. And the committee would hear that.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking like, and I appreciate you, and I'm not really asking for an answer today about it, but let's assume my assumption is correct, that the RFP would be developed earlier. Is there a downside, for example, to sharing that RFP at the May commission meeting if it's available, and having the full, like, delegation is fine when there isn't a commission meeting to do something, but if there is, like, why not share it, or share it as an informational item so people can actually ask questions about it and better understand what work is being done, rather than, you know, just being updated about something when the process is over. So I'm really just asking that some thought be given to how we do the best we can do to keep the full commission informed and have opportunities for comment about what seemed like exciting proposals, and that it that the full commission be as involved as it can, given the circumstances. As
No,
opposed
we
to
can
just a
certainly
straight
do that.
delegation.
I mean, we only have 4 meetings of the
I
year.
understand that.
So
Yep.
we can certainly at all 4 of those meetings build in not just an update, but a discussion point to fit. I mean, what we don't know is just where we are going to be in the process. But in like, say the impact committee's already like developed an RFP, and there's room and they haven't officially voted, then we will bring that to the committee for your feedback. So kind of just depending on where they are at in the cycle, we will bring that to you all for feedback.
Thank you.
I think that's a great idea. Yeah. I'm sorry, Erica and Angie. I don't know who raised their hand first.
Angie should go first.
Oh, okay, thanks. Well, that's kind of my point that Catherine was trying to make, is that we don't know any of the timing. 1, we don't know if it's going to happen at all. 2, we don't know when. 3, we don't have any information about what and all the details. So if the resolution for the new competitive awards had something that the committee, depending on to put something in about depending on the timing of the award, you know, of the bill, whatever that language would be, when the money becomes available, that if it's within like so many days of a regular meeting, it go to the full commission. If it's a long time between commission meetings, then the committee would take the first steps and bring it to the commission. I mean, I agree that we should have more oversight than just letting the committee do everything, but the committees do a lot of the things now. We make a lot of the decisions in committee now. I don't think it's going to be that awful to have the committee do it if there's a way to bring it to the commission if possible, or make it flexible. That's all.
So I'll go. First, I have a question, and then I just want to kind of put why I was in support of delegating the authority. But first, I guess my question for staff, is how much time does it add to the ability to distribute the awards if we have to make sure that the committee gets it all approved before the August commission? Because, we have to deal with posting to an agenda, drafting a memo. There's a lot of effort that goes into going from a committee into the full commission. So I don't think it's just as much as, I appreciate having the commission have oversight, that kind of thing. And while it might not be on an urgency bill, I do think that there is sort of an expectation, my understanding from the legislature, that we would be able to distribute the money fairly expeditiously. So if having to wait to propose it for the full commission meeting and then wait for that approval and then adds, 2-3 weeks, a month to the process, I want to sort of get some, if possible, some details about that, because that may be helpful to informing the commission generally about why we were thinking it would be appropriate to do this delegation. Does staff have a sense of the timing on that?
I mean, I think it's difficult because we don't know the complexity of what of the competitive grant or what will stick. I mean, there will be a point where, Selena and I will work together, TLAC and the commission will work together to advance something. And then what sticks to from the legislature and the governors, we don't know. But we don't, like, we're still gathering information. We can't even tell you right now if it's going to be contained to like one issue area or several, or it's going to be targeted to different substantive areas or different geographic. We don't know. We don't have a proposal right now. If we did, if it mimicked one of our other grants, then I think it would be fairly easier. I don't know that distribution. What we've been doing is something that that's what's going to be advanced. Kind of depending on the needs. We're kind of a little bit in new territory right now, and there's going to be that's why we're monitoring the situation. Obviously, once there's a change in federal administration and what comes down in terms of executive orders and changes in litigation, we're going to have to pivot. So it's hard to say without knowing what the complexity of the grants are. But I mean, we can modify that second motion to build in commission like feedback. I'm trying to think how we could do that, or what would be responsive to because obviously there's a commission meeting, we will bring it, but it feels like you want a little bit more than that, and I'm trying to figure out the language of what that is. That's a little bit more. Oh, sorry, Catherine, I think you're on mute.
I guess I'm wondering, we have a commission meeting in February. It doesn't sound like anything's happening before February. And so would it make sense to just give a bit of thought to what should this competitive process look like and how to involve the committee, and come back in February with something, rather than try and think of language and the permutations of it kind of right now, like to think about it and present something in February, which I still think will be quite timely.
And then I see Patience says, I appreciate Catherine's suggestions she just made. I just don't have like an immediate like answer, but I'm noodling on it, and I see Patience has raised her hand.
Thanks. I wonder if it makes sense for the whole commission to be involved in drafting this language. I would suggest not. I don't think the whole commission needs to participate in the drafting. I don't think the whole commission needs to approve it. I think that an arrangement where interested commissioners can attend the committee meetings and participate, at least not voting, but with suggestions and thoughts about the drafting process. I think that protects the commission's interests. And I don't have a felt need to supervise or monitor what it is that the committee does with the support of staff. Given the expertise and the long experience that certainly our staff has in creating RFPs and in monitoring compliance with them. So I think we should, whenever it's time to make the motion, I'm prepared to make the motion to adopt the proposed resolutions.
Amin?
I'll jump in and echo a bit of what's been said already, including Patience. I think, you know, obviously the full commission has the responsibility and authority to do all of the things and should be involved to the extent each commissioner is interested or able to. But we also are a large commission with a large set of priorities and responsibilities, and to be able to do this on the timeline that we need to do it, I think it's important that we be flexible enough to delegate authority. And this is not, again, like as has been said, this is not, and Catherine, I don't think you're suggesting this. This is not to the exclusion of input from folks who might be interested in joining these meetings or sharing input. But I think coming up with another type of arrangement, I don't know of another type of arrangement that would allow us to have flexibility and the ability to do this on the timeline that we need to. That would then also give the full commission the ability to weigh in. So I think, you know, if we're at the point, and I see Catherine, you got your hand up, so I'll let you and Ephraim weigh in, but I think we're getting close to times anyway. So I think we're probably at a point where we should I'll second the motion if Patience makes it.
I don't think Patience yet made a motion. So I guess I was going to suggest, I absolutely agree with the first part of the resolution. There is a need to do that quickly, and it's a formula grant, and the staff has lots of experience about that. I would say there isn't an urgency to passing the delegation for the second part of this, because there is nothing pending that would require that, and it could be done in February with some additional thought about how to involve commission members in that. So my actual suggestion, so that I can vote in favor of the first one, is that we separate the two motions if we want to proceed with the two motions, because there's clearly an urgency for the first one. I would suggest that we postpone the second one until the February meeting, but that's for we can take a vote on it. That's sort of how the process works. So, but I think separating them would make sure that the first one, which is the urgency and why we were actually meeting today, was to discuss the special session. Why I think we should separate them.
Efreen?
Yeah, just wanted to share that yeah, I think that makes sense. I guess the only thing, and this is more a question for staff or our liaisons, is, I think what Catherine's proposing is reasonable if we are meeting in February. But just curious, is there any indication that action would happen potentially before that, and that you might lose time in that? It sounds like we don't yet have a into the legislature, if that's correct. So just curious from staff, if we were to delay the second, what are your concerns with that? If we pushed it till February, right, and say, let's take this up in February, maybe or more, we'll do that. What's kind of the downside for you all on being responsive and ready?
I don't think there's, in terms of timing, something that's like, it's hard to say because, like I said, this is a very different kind of environment than a regular year. So I don't think so. I think from the staff's perspective, I don't know we can offer you more information than we have had. So it's whether you all need more time to kind of consider it in February, then again, I mean, that's a commission decision.
And and then just as clarifying, because I do think there's an element here in the second one that I want to make sure you wouldn't need any type of commission action for, which is the convening, the engagement, and the
No, we're still moving
potential.
forward with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and staff actually starting to develop what would end up going into an RFP anyways, with the stakeholder feedback. Like basically doing all the work without putting an RFP. So if it did happen, I just wanted to make sure if we removed it, that wouldn't preclude you.
No, that would
doing
slow
all
it
the
down.
work,
No,
right?
we don't need commission authority to do all that, like background stuff, information gathering.
And is my last question, and then I'll shut up. I promise I'll step back. The last question is just thinking more policy-wise and politically, is there any action or support that you would want us to take here that would be helpful in your advocacy with the legislature and saying the commission really thinks this is important and we should do this?
That's a good point, because there is a sense that the commission is could be a little bit slow on getting together grants. So it could send a message that, we're responsive, we've taken action, and we can be nimble and flexible if need be, in terms of like responding and having go through committee. So that's my take, but again, that's just my 2 cents.
I mean, I think taking the first action sends that same message that the commission, when it's appropriate, can delegate things to move things very quickly. So I will move the first resolution.
If you like, I can edit the slide to reflect that, if that's helpful.
I mean, either way, I mean, I'm just moving the first paragraph of the resolution, if there's a second for that.
I second that.
Okay, Erica, should I take roll call vote now?
If we have a motion and a second on the first part, then yes, and that's fine. We'll separate them and then talk about the next one before we adjourn.
Okay, great. Alakani? Babcock?
Aye.
Blakemore?
Yes.
Campbell?
Yes.
Galkin? Gonzalez? Wong?
Yes.
King?
Yes.
Klein? Mahoney?
Yes.
Morales?
Yes.
Pryor,
Yes.
Rosie, Judge Rosie,
Yes.
Danville,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Stalker,
Yes.
Vargas,
Yes.
Escobedo,
Yes.
Milrod,
Yes.
Balsarov,
Yes.
Connolly.
Yes.
All right, that's 16 yeses, motion passes.
Okay. So as to the second part, one thing I just wanted to say, and then we can decide whether we want to take a vote or put it off until February. Although I'll just note that our February meeting is intended to be more of a retreat where we talk about kind of bigger picture issues and our policy decisions for the coming year. That doesn't mean, and perhaps this resolution can be part of that conversation as far as what the commission should be doing versus the committees. But I will note that one of the things that we tried to do with the strategic repositioning was to try to get the commission not so much in the weeds, to try to keep the commission meetings at sort of high level, policy level issues. So I just put that out there as something to consider. Now, the question to me is whether there's a motion or whether,
Yes.
the
There's a motion.
Patience has moved to approve the second one. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, was that Judge Rosie for the second?
Great. I guess we'll take a vote.
Okay, Elakani,
Yes.
Babcock,
Yes.
Blakemore,
No.
Campbell, Galkin, Gonzalez,
Campbell, yes, sorry.
Gonzalez, Wong. Is Tony still on the call?
Yes.
Okay. King,
No.
Klein, Mahoney,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Pryor,
Yes.
Rosie,
Yes.
Sandville,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Stalker,
Yes.
Vargas,
Yes.
Escobedo,
Yes.
Milrod,
Yes.
Balsarov,
Yes.
Connolly.
Yes.
That's 15 yeses, 2 nos, motion passes.
All right. Well, thank you all for making time today and having, the flexibility and nimbleness so that we can respond to the legislature stuff. Staff, of course, we expect that you guys will keep us updated on what ends up passing. And if there's anything that needs to change in the delegations, please let us know. And, as Catherine pointed out, I think there is, the commission has a lot of interest in knowing what's happening. But I trust that the committees and the staff will do a great job. Efrain?
Yeah, Erica, yes, thank you. And I don't mean to delay us any further. Just wanted to reiterate and state my interest that in the event that there is a convening of the Program Development Impact Committee because there was action before a February meeting, I'm one of those commissioners that would like to be invited and notified.
I'm making
That's
a
a great
note
point.
to be really communicative about that with the full commission about when
Thank
the
you.
committee's meeting and what they're going to be discussing, so you can come. Yeah.
Great. And many thanks to the Program Impact Committee and Judge Rosie for taking that on. All right, we're at 1 o'clock. Thank you all. Thanks to staff for the hard work on this. We look forward to seeing what's happening. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank